We are coming to you live from the AI Summit here in New Delhi, where human rights have been discussed, but the focus point has been artificial intelligence, the new strides that the world is making, but also, are we entering a dangerous territory? Who really sets the red lines? To talk more about that, joined by exclusively here on NDTV, Volker Turk, who is the High Commissioner for Human Rights at the United Nations. Thank you very much, Mr. Turk, for joining us. Let me begin by asking you about the red lines, really. You know, artificial intelligence has been creating waves from US to China and India. We're the largest gathering here, more than 300,000 people, really coming out here. But who really decides what the red lines are for the AI? We may be creating great achievement when it comes to comfort for the people and convenience, but it is being used in battlefields and for cyber crimes as well.
Yeah. So it's clear, huge opportunities of AI, absolutely clear on health, education, sustainable development, but there are also risks. So the question that we always have, what do we do about the risk analysis? And human rights are precisely the frame because it's about state obligations. These are obligations that states, all member states of the United Nations have accepted themselves. So they are a frame to put constraints on power, on the exercise of power, and they are guardrails. So important for companies to observe these because there are human rights obligations of companies as well. But more importantly, for each country to find a way to regulate AI design and development. Of course, much better if it happens at the global level. And the United Nations have really been working a lot for that purpose. And it's really great that there is this summit here in India because it's the first time that AI gets discussed in the global south and led by a very important country such as India to actually advance precisely some of the red lines that you were talking about.
And High Commissioner, you are at the AI Summit, and since morning, Prime Minister has spoken, President Macron has spoken. We have the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres also speaking on the occasion. How important do you think at this juncture in history is this particular summit? One of the largest democracies in the world, hosting such a giant summit. What are the kind of responsibilities that you think India has at this point? Because India also talks about uniting people, bringing in parity and equality when it comes to AI for all, bringing the people, planet, and progress together, and at the same time, the global south getting the center stage in the leadership role in this AI summit.
So, very important because it's about equity. And it's about the sharing of scientific research, the sharing of technological development. So it's not ending up in the hands of a few somewhere in the world, I mean Silicon Valley, but that it's actually, that knowledge is shared. It's, by the way, a human right. It's in Article 27 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, sharing of scientific research equitably around the world. So that's why this summit is very important because it shows that there are lots of startups. I had a chance to interact with a lot of Indian startups here who want to develop AI, but they also want to be inspired by doing good, by creating prosperity. And that's why, again, the human rights framework brings in that dimension. And it's a dimension that inspires, that encapsulates the imagination of people, but it also makes sure that there is a track to follow and not just to do things that get you off track because the risks and the safety issues are too big.
I know we have more than 70 countries participating here. While the summit is on AI, it's important to discuss other global issues as well. And one among them is the raging conflict in Gaza. Over the last 2 years or more, we've had hundreds and thousands of people being killed, the Israel-Hamas conflict developing. Now, right now, there's a ceasefire. But what prevents? Perhaps in future there could be another war situation or a humanitarian crisis. Now, the question also is that from the Trump administration, there's a board of peace that has come in, and many countries have joined it. Many have shown apprehension. Has the UN been invited, or do you think that UN is perhaps, or board of peace is dynamically opposite to the UN's aims and aspirations?
Well, first of all, it's very important that there is a ceasefire. And the ceasefire needs to hold and it needs to lead to the two-state solution in reality, meaning also self-determination of the Palestinian people. That's in the long-term interest of both people in Israel and the Palestinians. They need to find peace. And I hope that the ceasefire leads to it. When it comes to the board of peace, There was a very strong endorsement by the Security Council, so the United Nations are involved because the Security Council authorized it. But when we talk about things beyond the authorization of the Security Council, that's, no one can replace the United Nations. The United Nations is all of us, all 193 member states. That legitimacy and the convening power of the United Nations is unparalleled. And the work that my colleagues, myself, are doing on a daily basis for development, for human rights, for peace and security is something that you cannot switch off. The world would be a more chaotic, more anarchic place if you didn't have the United Nations. You would have to reinvent them immediately.
Another conflict zone raging for the last 4 years is Ukraine. And the Russia-Ukraine crisis has been talked about globally multiple times, but there doesn't seem to be a solution. The Indian Prime Minister repeatedly has also said that this is not an era of war, solutions cannot be found in the battlefield. He was perhaps one of the only leaders who has met both these leaders in their respective capitals and told them to adopt dialogue and diplomacy and not the roadmap to war. How do you see the peace process can be achieved, perhaps in the next few months?
Well, clearly it is in the interest to find a peaceful solution, but it must be a peaceful solution in line with the UN Charter, in line with international law, and it needs to be two parties coming together and negotiating it. Obviously, with the mediation of powerful countries such as India, extremely important. But I do hope, for the sake of the Ukrainian people, that indeed peace is found, because what we see today is more death. We see the attacks against critical infrastructure. It's very cold. It's one of the coldest winters they have had for years. You can imagine what this means for women, for children, but also for those with disabilities, because they can't even get out of their apartment block. By the way, I just want to mention one other thing, because we always talk about Gaza, Israel, Ukraine. We have 61 conflicts raging in the world today, and it is important to also put a spotlight on all the forgotten crises in the world.
Absolutely, I agree. We need to do that. So shifting focus towards South Asia. In India's neighborhood in Bangladesh, there's been a crisis that's been underway for the last almost 2 years. There have been repeated protests that led to a so-called revolution that Sheikh Hasina government fell, and we have the Yunus administration in charge. But a lot of minority killings took place during that period. A lot of minorities attacked, their business establishments attacked, and perhaps a free run being given with the law completely missing. Now there's a new government that has come to power, Tariq Rahman in control. But how do you see the human rights situation in Bangladesh?
So it is very important that we had a transition period. In that transition period, there were lots of reforms that were started, including, by the way, a very strong independent human rights institution that was just nominated. For the new government that is going to take office or is taking office soon, it's so important that human rights is central for the protection of each and everyone in Bangladesh, irrespective of minority status, irrespective of, especially from a gender equality perspective. And I really hope that the lessons learned from the past means transitional justice, reconciliation, healing, but also building on these incredible, advantages that came out of the reform process, that human rights are central and they protect each and everyone in the country.
Indeed. High Commissioner, one of the concerns that India has had over the last more than 3 decades is terrorism. There's been cross-border terrorism, there's been radicalization, there have been Islamist groups who've been involved in killing Indians from Jammu and Kashmir to New Delhi. Last year, you saw 2 major terror attacks in Pahalgam in Jammu and Kashmir, and then in Red Fort in the national capital Delhi, perhaps after 1.5 decades. How do you see the terrorism situation in India? Has it to be condemned universally? Secondly, at the UN level, do you think that the UN has failed to even define terrorism, forget countering it?
Well, first of all, it's important to focus on the victims and the survivors. I mean, terrorism is something horrific. It should never happen. Extremism is not in any way, it's part of polarization and the extremism that we see in so many parts of the world, including in South Asia. The best response is always to find a way to build trust, build confidence, to be community-oriented, but also to use human rights as a comprehensive response to extremism, to terrorism attacks. and to focus on the victims and the survivors, because very often we forget the victims, and they need to be central also to a healing process, to a reconciliation process, and to counter some of the extremisms that we see emerge in the world. By the way, also through social media. I mean, we see the radicalization often happens through social media platforms. So there needs to be also, when it comes to hate speech, when it comes to dehumanization, when it comes to incitement to violence, the early warning signals you can always see on social media platforms. And there needs to be much more, again, human rights impact analysis so that these things can be stopped in the tracks.
Finally, High Commissioner, my last question. You're here in New Delhi. We're delighted to welcome you here. You were there at the leaders session, and it's a hectic day ahead. But what is the message that you take away from India at this important juncture from this AI summit? And overall, how's the diplomacy like when it comes to India and the human rights at the United Nations?
So India is an extremely vibrant country. It's full of energy, it's full of inspiration, it's full of, but I mean, you can feel the energy, and that's wonderful to see in this world. It is important to always bear in mind history. And when it comes to human rights, the history of human rights is interconnected with the history of India. I mean, the spiritual traditions in this country, the religious traditions that you have, nourished human rights. There were two feminist leaders in the 40s. We had Lakshmi Menon and Hansa Mehta, who were two Indian feminists who were part of the development of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And they were the ones who put forward gender equality in the Universal Declaration. So that history needs to be honored, and it needs to be, translated into today's realities when we face climate change, the digital world. And of course, India is a very important global power, and we need India's voice when it comes to peace, when it comes to development and human rights, because all three are interconnected.
Well, High Commissioner, always a pleasure interacting with you, and we wish you a very fruitful visit. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.